the duly appointed officials of the crown, the royal army, His Majesty's army, marches out to put down people who are not obeying the law. And those people stand in Lexington Common on the morning of the 19th of April in 1775 and say, we're not going to do it anymore. They don't say this in these words, but what they essentially say is, we don't consider you legitimate anymore, we're not going to obey your rules. And famously, when the British officer comes up to Captain Parker and says that morning on the 19th of April, in the name of His Majesty King George III, get out of the way. And then he says something else I'm not going to say. Captain Parker replies, if you mean to have a war, let it start here. Now, what they were doing, essentially, was defying their government. One of the things you've got to keep in your mind is, people in 1775 did not think, oh, we're Americans, oh, we're Democrats, oh, we are people who believe in government of the people, by the people, and for the people. They were subjects of the king, British subjects, grown up that way. Many of them fought for the king. And suddenly, here, on this morning in April, they're saying, no more. We no longer accept the legitimacy of the government. And that's then what the American Revolution was all about. Not just fighting Great Britain, not just winning independence, but saying it's something more than that. What the United States is going to be about, as the French Revolution would be about in 1789 and other revolutions throughout the Western world would be, we're not going to only declare our independence, we're not only going to say we're no longer considering the British government legitimate, we are going to try an experiment here to see, can ordinary people govern themselves? And in many ways, that's the essence of what the United States has been about for 250 years. Can ordinary people, after centuries of government by monarchs and bishops and priests, and the idea that ordinary people are essentially incapable of governing themselves, could you, in fact, establish a form of government that would demonstrate that people could control themselves and run their own government? So, the United States of America, then, from the very beginning, was a serious experiment. Something far more important than the establishment of a country. An experiment in government. And so when the famous British Englishman Thomas Paine, whom you may have heard of, Paine, wrote his famous pamphlet Common Sense in 1776, attacking monarchy and justifying the American Revolution, he said in one of the first few paragraphs of that document, the cause of America is in great measure the cause of all mankind. That is, what we're doing here in Philadelphia and Boston and Charleston is not just doing what we're doing for ourselves, we're doing it for the cause of democracy and liberty everywhere. And if you listen to the President of the United States today, if you listen to your leaders over the last 250 years, that theme has reappeared over and over and over again. That's what the United States is about. Not just a country, but a country that represents certain kinds of ideals. So the United States then begins in a revolution or rebellion against empire, and to some extent then, by extension, against government. And it establishes a republic which is defined as a government without a king. A government in which the public, the people, govern themselves. Okay? So this is the way the United States gets set up. The United States wins the American War for Independence, or rather, more correctly, the British lose it because they can't figure out a way to put it down. And in 1783, the British recognized American independence, and the United States is on its way. Well, almost immediately, even in fact before the end of the American Revolution in 1783, many of the leaders of the United States have begun to doubt whether or not people can in fact govern themselves. They are afraid that if you create a purely democratic form of government, that is, in which all the people, and by the time they're talking about white men basically, that if they participate, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is everybody's going to get what they want. People are going to be what we would call essentially selfish. That people are self-interested above all else. And what people want is what they want for themselves. They want government to do something for them, but they don't want to pay for the government to do something for somebody somewhere else. They are essentially people who do not have a very broad vision of society. Basically, what we want is what benefits ourselves. How did you get people, ordinary people then, to make the kind of sacrifice necessary to build a great country? Classic example would be taxes. How did you get people to say, I've got to give up some of my property, which the rebellion was all about, protecting my property, in order to maintain an army that may protect the borders of the United States? So if I live in Rhode Island, why do I want to pay money to support an army to defeat Indians in Ohio or Kentucky? Why, if I live in South Carolina, do I want to pay taxes to help people build a bridge in Pennsylvania? Does it make sense to people at the time? Now, a lot of Americans at the time and still today would say, hey, that's the essence of democracy. We have a right to say no. We have a right to think individually. But many of the leaders of the United States in the 1780s and the 1790s said, no, sorry, if you're going to be that way, you're going to have chaos, you're going to have total confusion, and the United States will fall apart. Because if people only pursue all the time what they think is best for themselves and their family and their local town, and don't think about the larger good, and aren't willing to make necessary sacrifices, then the whole thing is simply going to disintegrate. And they looked at the history of the world, they looked at the history of Rome, the history of Greece, and other countries, and they said, this is what happens, guys. Why did Rome fall? Rome fell, according to the leaders of the American Revolution, not because other people came in and defeated them so much, but because the Romans themselves lost their virtue, lost their willingness to sacrifice, became more interested in luxury and having a good time and relaxing and enjoying the benefits of being wealthy, rather than saying we have to do what is necessary in order to become a great country, and that might sometimes require us to give up money, to give up position, to give up comfort, to give up wealth, or to make the ultimate sacrifice to die in battle for your country, what we might call patriotism. So, part of what's going on in the 1780s then is that the United States, coming out of the American Revolution, there's a broad spectrum. And the word I use, what I mean by that is, if you take public opinion in the United States in the 1780s and the 1790s, virtually all Americans agree that they want a republic. But exactly what that republic should look like, they don't agree on. Very few people want a king anymore. Nobody wants no government at all, or very few people want that. What you have to figure out is some way to negotiate power. How much power should government have? How much power should the national government have? How much power should state governments have? How much power should the governor, who's like a king, have? How much power should the legislature have? How much power should judges have? How do you figure all this out? And on what issues should it operate? So that politics in the early American Republic, in the period after 1783, becomes all about people arguing exactly about where the line should be, the borders should be. Where should the General Assembly and the governor actually find that line of power? Where should states do things and the federal government do things? Where should local governments be in control? In other words, how do you negotiate out some way or another so that you can have both liberty and order? So that government actually creates or builds a great nation, but does it in such a way that doesn't make people think it's behaving like the old British Empire and taking away their liberty. So, to put it in a nutshell, what you've got here is politics is all about trying to negotiate constantly on a daily basis a sort of relationship between freedom and liberty on one hand and order and government on the other hand. And this is not resolved in one day. It is not like everybody's over here and there are other people over here. We live in a world today in the 21st century where, thanks to cable television and other things, everybody's got to be this or this. Label them this way, and everybody's this person or this person. Everybody's a liberal or everybody's conservative, and there's nothing in between. I don't think that's true today. I don't think that's certainly not true in the 18th century. Most people are not on either extreme. They're working this out all the time, on every issue, on a daily basis.